Hey guys, Liana here. It's Mountain Monday, so you know what to do. Breathe in and out. Breathe in and out. So sorry this video is late again. I had another event over the weekend. I was promoting my book, Wrestling with Gods. And it was an interesting weekend. It was a very different experience than I'm used to. For people who don't do a lot of conventions, sorry about the background noise. Somebody's doing some work in the neighborhood. So if you hear a weird thing that sounds like a swarm of angry bees, that's that. Um, and then Momo's purring, but I don't think that's picking up. But it for people who aren't really familiar with the convention scene, there's expos, pop culture expos, which are those massive things you see like the San Diego Comic-Con. And then there are smaller literary, like book sci-fi conventions that happen in hotels. And when you're promoting a book, you end up doing a lot more of those because they're the ones that actually buy your book, even though there are a lot more people at a big pop culture expo. It's much more expensive to attend, and especially if this event was in the United States. I am not a US citizen. Unless you're invited, you get some trouble at the border. They want to hear that you were invited and you didn't solicit. The Americans approached you because, like any country, they want their citizens to have the first opportunity for business and sales and all that stuff. And so they want to know that you're coming down to benefit Americans as opposed to benefiting Canada land. Um, and it was, I hadn't done one of these in a while. I'd taken a step back from literary conventions other than a show out in Winnipeg called KeyCon, which is sort of both. Like KeyCon was one of the literary shows to sort of embrace other media, and going in as a video game person to a literary convention can get interesting because when you start having discussions of narrative or character, my on it is radically different than someone who books uber alles. um and that led to some interesting discussions, one of which I did a panel with two other people on Gamergate. Now, I agreed to do this panel, and I said, I want it to be just me because this is a touchy subject, and I don't want to start butting heads with people who have, through no fault of their own, formed an opinion based on the mainstream media, as opposed to me, who formed an opinion actually, experiencing being at ground zero for the thing. And there were two other people on the panel anyway. One of whom was actually a friend of mine, so that was fine. We talked about it in the past. He's actually asked me about it before. He was there just to equate it to, it was very interesting, equating it to the Lebanese Civil War. Because in the Lebanese Civil War, it rapidly became not what it was about at all. It just became a bunch of factional conflicts all coming together in one big blow up, and people who had nothing to do with the original conflict jumped in because there was a fight to be had and politics to be made. And that was a very interesting comparison. I actually, when you get that history repeats itself phenomenon, it lends to interesting stuff. No, there's no recording of this, guys. I'm sorry. I did ask, but the other panelists wouldn't consent to be recorded because of the concerns of online trolling. It's just not worth it to them, and I understand that. But people are like, what? There was a Gamergate panel? What? And they wanted to know. Now, what about the other person? Had no direct experience, just came in going, yeah, it's a movement to harass women out of video games. And I'm like, well, we'll see how you feel at the end of this. And by the end, he basically said, well, I learned a lot of information, and left. But the audience was the interesting thing to me. The audience was it. Literary conventions tend to be older and whiter than most sci-fi cons. There was at least one African American person in the audience, but it was mainly older people and whiter people, some of whom were gamers, male and female, for a very long time. They laughed a lot when I mentioned that I referenced the Tandy 1000 in a video, and I said a lot more people knew what that machine was than I thought. And so obviously they're of my vintage and up. Um, but they were them, and then there were people. An astrophysicist came to my talk. He researches dwarf planets and things like that. And so I asked him, why did you come to this talk? And he said his son is in school and interested in video games. And so he wanted to sort of know what this was about. And I think that's great that people are trying to understand their, family member's hobby, even though they're themselves. And so it was one of those things where obviously the circumstances were not what I asked for. And it was a good panel, got a lot of information across, and it got a lot of information across without it breaking down into like a really nasty conflict, even though there was disagreement off the top, which is good. I would have liked to have been able to lay out the information in a more cohesive, uninterrupted way, just because it is very complicated. And I mean, my approach to the whole Gamergate controversy, I take it back to 2012, deal with Gertzman Gate, retake Mass Effect, and the Dorito Pope thing. Because I think that's relevant. I think that if those three things had not happened, then Gamergate wouldn't have happened either. And people, of course, had heard of Gamergate because they were at the panel. They hadn't heard of any of those other situations. So the audience was quite good. They came in with an open mind. And one of the things we talked about was sexism in anything, specifically this in video games, that matters, and sexism that really doesn't matter. And the fact that the crowd was a little bit older, and there were women who have lived a little, and the thing I've found, that the older I get, the more confident I get in being female and what that means in the world. And these ladies were coming from similar perspectives. And so I talked about sexism that actually gets in my way in gaming is things like somebody hassling me when I went in to buy God of War 3. I had to prove that I was actually playing the game for myself instead of giving it to a kid. That is sexism that actually gets in my way. It could be because it was getting in the way of allowing me to purchase a product, right? Somebody calling me nasty names on the internet is far less relevant to my ability to enjoy games. And that got a huge murmur of understanding in the room. And that was great because it shows that there are people, most notably in this case, women who still sort of practice sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Now, the interesting thing that was sort of a counterpoint to this very good experience, because hey, there was a room of about 20 people who walked away more knowledgeable about what the whole Gamergate controversy really was. And we got into anonymous board wars and some of the internal politics, and the fact that the equally bad harassment of men was ignored by the mainstream media and things like that. So it was very productive. But then we go out and, there's an entire rest of a convention, and some things happened to some of my authors that I was there. I was there as the editor for Wrestling Writers. And some things happened to those writers that by the end of the weekend, we were all sort of, okay, we're done. We did our jobs. We're going to go home now. And one of the things about the book is that it's about religion and science fiction, and it's a very diverse group of authors, but we did it what I believe is the right way. We actually selected the books based on merit, and because me and my co-editor Jerome Stewart aren't bigoted people, lo and behold, we ended up with a nice mix of male and female authors and non-white and white authors, and and then we did get into the whole thing of more authors of color probably would have got into the book if more authors of color submitted. And because there were certain high profile names I was looking for that just didn't submit. And of course, that's their right. But it's just one of those things. We can only be as diverse as the submissions allow us to be. But we still did pretty well, all things considered. And of course, we had a massive amount of religious diversity because of the source material. But going into a convention which has a clear majority can make for some uncomfortable moments for people that are not part of that majority. And there were some frustrating moments with inappropriate behavior, some of which of a sexualized nature. I won't say sexual because that overblows the incident, but it was uncomfortable. We didn't report it or anything like that, but there are some people that won't be going back because of that situation. And that made me think about the way we handle these situations in geekdom. And because, obviously on paper, we're supposed to rise up and complain and do all this stuff. That's not always the best thing. And that's not always what an author wants you to do. Sometimes they just want to get out of there and go back to their corner of the world and forget about it. And that is absolutely their right. And there's nothing wrong with them for wanting it. It's the right thing to do a lot of the time. And that's what we decided to do. We just sort of decided that this probably wasn't for us. Obviously, if things change, our opinions will change accordingly. But some people did not have good experiences, and that matters. But that doesn't mean we're going to tell the event how to change what they're doing. Now, one of the especially uncomfortable things that went on is there was an attendee who is a suspected pedophile. And every time this person walked into the room, all of us were made uncomfortable. But the emphasis is suspected, right? None of us have any direct evidence that, we can go to the police and do anything about this. We don't even know if they're around for a very, very long time. But we saw this person taking a photo of a cosplayer we knew was underage, fully dressed, just took a picture of the costume, but we all were like, should we do something? And this is where sort of the politics and tolerance and things like this become a very gray area. And I've been thinking about this a lot because we now have to choose, do we go in there and promote our book and say a reader is a reader and we don't have any proof, so we're just not going to get involved in this situation? Or do we go, even if there's no evidence, do we want to be seen being too, what's the word I'm looking for? Being too lax in our concern for what is clearly a very serious social issue, which is people who sexualize children. And by children, I mean kids that look like kids, I know some people are like, 17, 18 years old, that's different. I don't want to get into that debate today. It's at least under 14 kind of thing. The kid looked young. And there's been a lot of discussion online because of some provocative articles about how, will you give me a chance? Will you hear my story? And like, to me, my immediate thing, pedophilia, no. Like, no, there are just some things I won't be tolerant of, and I'm not sorry about that. I accept that it is a sickness, and there's a huge difference between having urges and doing something about it, but I that is too far for me to go. It's not like some of these other gender and sexual identity issues that involve consenting adults, right? I mean, somebody can be gay without um preying on people. It's two adults. And so I don't, certain people who were opposed to gay rights conflated homosexuality with pedophilia and bestiality. And now the goalposts have moved to the point that some on the left think we should sympathize with sexual practices that are inherently robbing children of innocence too soon. And that is the issue with the whole thing that I think makes people, including me, uncomfortable, is this whole issue of consent. This whole yes means yes movement, which agree with it or disagree with it. I think there's something to be said for active consent as opposed to, well, he or she didn't say no. Which I think goes into, there's a stereotype of women being taken advantage of, but every guy I know who works in entertainment and has to do any sort of live show in a bar or something like that, these guys get groped all the time. And they don't like it, but they're expected to just suck it up. And I admit that working with these guys who get their asses grabbed and sometimes get the front parts grabbed has made me less reactive when something happens to me, because hey, we're all in this together. It's not so much that it's a gender thing, it's that it's a performer thing now. And there's this perception that if someone's a performer, then their personal physical boundaries are looser for whatever reason, and that's not okay. None of us like it, but it's not a gender thing. We're sort of all in it together. Does it mean it's not something we should address and recognize, like, hey, you want to get your hand off that guy's ass? He's married. That is something that matters. And unfortunately, it seems like whenever something starts happening to a man, it sort of becomes, well, this is no big deal. Gender equity, yay. That's not so. I think that keep your hands to yourself is a good rule of thumb. And that doesn't mean like you can't put your hand on someone's arm or put your hand on their shoulder or something like that when you're trying to get by them in a hallway to let them know they're there. But that's different than grabbing someone's ass. We all know it's different, right? But it seems like the lines are starting to blur to the point that, the reality is that people don't go back to events where they feel uncomfortable for any reason. And that's just common sense. And the reality is we were all made uncomfortable because of the rumors surrounding a particular person. Now, the reality is there are tons of rumors about me. Of course, there was a Gamergate meetup in Los Angeles recently, so I suddenly get this rush of reports from other people. Don't tell anybody I told you this, but, and I mean, there's still stuff going on that half of Gamergate hates me or whatever. It's like, there's nothing I can do about it. That rumor's not going away. There are people out there who are gonna think I'm Satan no matter what. And it's just, at this point, it's just an irritant. It's one of those things like, it's a rash. I wish it would go away, but it's not really a big deal. I put cream on it, it's fine. And why do I wish it would go away? Because I don't want people to be uncomfortable around me. And that's just common sense. This whole idea of, well, grow thicker skin. You need to learn how to handle criticism. I know how to handle criticism just fine. Okay? Anybody who sees what I have to do on a daily basis, the review process for any sort of writing involves healthy doses of criticism. Now, there are different types of criticism. There's attacks, and then there's constructive criticism. And constructive criticism is awesome. Everyone, who wants to get better in something wants constructive criticism. But constructive criticism is also about what you do well as what you don't do well. And unfortunately, there are certain people who are only interested in the negatives where I'm concerned. And are there negatives? Of course, there's negatives for everybody. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody is sort of ignorant of certain cultural points. And there are some people that just refuse to let mistakes go, or refuse to, ignorance of a situation that I've since corrected go. They won't let it go. They're holding a grudge. There's nothing I can do about that. But then I start thinking, well, does that mean I should welcome somebody with pedophilia rumors about them in with open arms because I have no proof and I don't know? Makes it really difficult, and this is sort of the thing I came out of this weekend feeling. And then I went home and I caught up on Blackish because I needed a laugh, and it was that episode about the N-word. And they actually say it on the show, but they bleep it for the TV broadcast. It's a brilliant, brilliant piece of comedy. So brilliant. I wish I'd seen it live so I could have been talking it up much, much sooner. It is brilliant because the episode starts that their adorable 8-year-old boy, Jack, for those of you who know, Blackish is about an upper middle class black family living in, I think, Beverly Hills. It's sort of a cross between The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Cosby Show, and Sanford and Son. It's elements of all three of those shows, and Bernie Mac kind of smooshed together, but it's new too. I mean, the kids are amazing actors, and the mom is amazing, and Lawrence Fishburne is hilarious, and Anthony Anderson's a star of it. He's very funny too, and he's looking fit lately. I don't know what happened in the off season, but the episode starts with their adorable little boy Jack does a talent show, and the whole thing about Jack is that he dances all the time, and so he does a dance number and a rap. And it's Kanye West Gold Digger, the uncensored version, not the radio edit. And for those of you who know, we know I ain't saying she a gold digger, but she ain't messing with no broke. And you know what comes next, and it ain't Jigga. And he gets suspended from school, and they're going to expel him because the school has a zero tolerance policy that the mom, Bo, helped implement. And there's some very funny sort of outrage warrior scenes where she's out there with a megaphone and holding signs. And, at the same time, the older son, they call him Junior, it has become an eco-hero, as they call it. So he's gone way overboard on environmental stuff. And so it was an interesting skewering of outrage culture, as well as dealing with a very, very difficult social issue. And the way they resolved it was actually quite interesting. I don't want to spoil it for people. It was very, very funny. But they eventually, after trying to get this zero tolerance policy walked back, because they realize now, the practice, the reality of situations is much more complex than setting tough policy, getting tough on bigotry and all that stuff in theory. Right. Zero tolerance policies make everyone feel real good when they're put in. Yay, we're doing something. But policy is only the setup to do something. It's not actually doing something. Doing something means implementing your policies. And that's where things start to become far more complicated. And so throw a kid at a school for repeating music lyrics, he probably doesn't even know what they mean. Because that song was everywhere. And everybody knew what he was really saying, right? But it went into this whole thing about who can say that word, who can't, which was very, very funny. And then it got into other words that you can't say, including, one word in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Colored is considered a slur now, but the NAACP still exists. And then the other one was, hey, we give checks to the United Negro College Fund, but you can't say Negro in isolation. It was very, very funny. But the ending, basically, they stopped the kid from being expelled from school because they successfully argued that expelling a black kid for making a black slur was actually racist. And so the politically correct school board got sort of caught on its own desire to run away as fast as you can from any accusation of racism, that they just suspended the kid for 3 days instead of expelling him. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. I thought it was amazing. But it really showed how difficult these situations are. And looping back in, apparently a Doctor Who panel, a couple of my authors were on, descended into a discussion of identity politics and the whole thing about, the assumption that Doctor Who is a white man and it's okay that he does various things which really aren't okay. And, one person apparently actually said, who cares if the Doctor is racist and a misogynist? Like, no, we should care. Does that mean that characters can't have faults? No, but saying, who cares? It's really easy to say when you're not affected by these things. And so I guess where I'm at right now and why this is relevant to this whole thing is it seems like all these systems that have been put in place to spare people's feelings actually neglect to factor in people's actual feelings. And there is no substitute for asking an individual that is actually right in front of you, are you personally okay with this? And are you okay with this word coming from me? Because the other thing I got to do this weekend is hang with some of my, disability advocate friends. And I mean, you hear the best disability jokes from disabled people, right? People with disabilities. See, that's the thing. We say disabled people all the time, but the correct term is people with disabilities, because people are not their disabilities. It seems like a small distinction, but it matters a lot to some people. And that's the point. I will correct myself. I don't care. But, in private, they're laughing off their own situations. It is completely politically incorrect. And it's awesome. And it's good that people are willing to do that and not spend their entire lives afraid. But there are places it's appropriate and a lot of those rules are unwritten, and it makes it very, very complicated. And this just reminded me so much that there's no easy way through this stuff. There's no way to make it simple. There's no way to make it not energy intensive. It's trusting your gut and going, okay, this situation feels wrong to me. This situation doesn't feel so wrong to me, and there are certain, when people feel like an equal to someone, like a bunch of the authors were hanging out, just having a drink, and we were all like, listen, book boy, or listen, zombie boy, or, YA girl. And we were all joking because we'd all been through that being pigeonholed, and we were laughing about it. But it was that sameness that allowed us to laugh about it. When you're trying to laugh at something that doesn't personally affect you, that becomes a lot more complicated, and that is valid. And that is something that people have the right to object to. But it's one thing to question a behavior or call out a behavior. I hate that term because it inherently implies public shaming. But, it's one thing to go, hey, can you not do that? It's another thing to go, you're a terrible person. Because you know what? They probably aren't. People are exceptionally complex, and everyone has their flaws. And I think it's so important, and it was just reminded to me even more, that you can think something someone's doing is terrible and make that very, very clear. But it's a much, much higher burden of proof to say that someone is a terrible person. And people cross that line too soon all the time. And it's making it harder to deal with some of these social issues that we're encountering. Because let's face it, the minute you attack someone personally, they shut down and go, why should I talk to you? You can't keep this, you know, you can't keep this in bounds. I mean, on the weekend, there was a panel where this one panelist just kept insulting successful writers. Especially anything that even remotely seemed like Tolkien. It was a Tolkien clone or a Tolkien rehash or whatever. And I finally said, like, look, when enough people borrow concepts from somebody, that's where we get genres from. Everybody had to do it first, and then there's variations on a theme. And I gave the example from gaming of, for the longest time, we called a certain type of game Doom clones. But enough Doom clones happened that all of it, we changed the name to first-person shooters. It had become a genre. And that's good. Like it actually, every once in a while, you get these transcendent properties that inspire a whole bunch more. They're not copycats, they're variations on a theme. And, gaming and the complicated genre and type of game definitions that we have to deal with has taught me that, and I've been able to apply it back to books and new window. But this person who only focuses on books and not other forms of media, that just fell right on deaf ears. They went right back to the idea of Tolkien ripoffs, and it's like, well, I'm pretty sure the audience got what I was saying, and I'm pretty sure the audience understood what I was saying, that everybody has to borrow certain concepts so the audience can follow you. If something's completely new, people don't know where to file it in their brains. And so we have to be more forgiving of homages, of adaptations, of things like that, as long as they do put something original in it. And again, there's no easy way around the nuances here, and I think that's a good thing. I think that struggling with these concepts makes you a better person, as long as you actually work on it. It doesn't matter what decision you come to. I've had people say, oh no, pedophiles are sick and we should treat them as mentally ill, and as long as they don't actually touch a kid, that's okay. I'm not sure I agree that it's okay to just be okay with someone walking around with those urges. I think that any other compulsive behavior is treated, any other compulsive urges are treated, because if someone relapses, say, as an alcoholic, best case scenario, they only hurt themselves. They get really drunk and fall into a stupor and don't kill anybody with their car. But there is a potential to kill someone with their car. If someone slips as a pedophile, a kid gets scarred for life. And I'm not okay taking that risk. Now, other people are, and that's the decision that they've come to. I kind of feel like, okay, I don't agree with that person, and I strongly don't agree with that person, but at least they thought about it. At least it seems like they actually thought about the issue for more than 5 minutes. And I think that's the important thing, especially since I don't think greater society is really at risk of throwing their arms wide and welcoming in pedophiles. I mean, that is going to be a stigmatized thing for a super long time. Possibly always. And I'm okay with that. There are some things I'm okay with. I'm okay with murder being considered a bad thing. I've been heavily criticized by some people for not liking rape. I don't have a problem not liking rape. You're not supposed to like rape. Now, does that mean I think it should never be in a work of art ever? No, that's a completely different story. It just has to be handled exceptionally delicately. And it has to be handled as the difficult thing it is, as should everything. I mean, one of the things we talked about on the weekend was an Asian writer talked about the fact that when he goes to movies and the like minion characters, which are all Asian in some of these action movies, they just get killed, and there's no, and then a couple of white guys get popped, and all of a sudden there's a social consequence. And that that creates dissonance for him, and he's chucked out of the movie because he's saying, well, this movie is saying that some lives matter more than others. And obviously he's going to notice that more because he is an Asian person. Now, does that mean that every Asian person is going to have this thing? No. But it's valid to listen to him and go, huh, that's interesting. That's something to keep in mind. And I think mindfulness is the whole thing here. You don't have to come any hard and fast, zero tolerance. Nope, this is the way it is. Tolerance. Did I say tolerance? That's interesting. But the important thing is you're open to these pieces of new information and go, huh, that's interesting. I didn't consider that. I'm going to chew on that. That is elevating discourse. That is free thought, right? The minute you close your mind off completely to any consideration of alternatives, you've stopped thinking and you are not helping, and that doesn't mean you can't have firmly held beliefs. But if those beliefs really are that strong, they can survive questioning. And that's what's important to me. And that's what I'm grateful about over this weekend is a lot of my theories of how the world works were questioned. There were a lot of tough, spur-of-the-moment decisions that had to be made. And that's good, right? That's why I'm opposed to this idea of being able to avoid quote-unquote triggering content in universities. Universities are optional. They are. You don't need to go to university. So, or at least in an ideal economy, you shouldn't. Manufacturing jobs should be 6 months to 2 years in a college course. You should not need a 4-year university program to learn how to work an assembly line, okay? Or certain things like being a bank teller, things like that. No, this does not require a university education. Universities, I believe, are designed to train leaders. And leaders need to make tough decisions and they need to face difficult situations. And university is training for that. Going out and doing public appearances. People who are famous get paid a lot of money because these are difficult situations and these are difficult to navigate with class and with kindness. And that's where the money comes from. That's where the danger pay comes from. Business is the same way. Business people are paid the big bucks to be experts on people and how to get people convinced to buy. And those are skills and those are honed and those involve dealing with people you don't like and dealing with difficult situations and even dealing with things that make you feel kind of dirty. And all you can do is your best and do better the next time. And so that's my food for thought for this week. I'm sure some people are going to take issue with it, but everything I've said is true. So we're going to wrap up. Ready? Breathe in. And out. And breathe in. And out.